Hi, my name is Tiago Duarte and welcome to Daily Bits. In this video I'm going to show you how I made my acoustic panels on the chip. I basically took some pallets from the garbage and I converted them into acoustic panels, and it was really cheap, and you will see at the end a list of the cost per panel. The panel dimensions were based on the dimensions of the rock wool. So the width was 63.5 centimeters or 24.6 inches, and the length was 1 meter or 100 centimeters and 39.37 inches, and the thickness was 6 centimeters or 2.36 inches. The thickness of the wood was a little bit larger than the thickness of the rock wool, but at the end it worked well. As you will see later in the video, I added 4 squares to the corners of each panel. These squares added strength to the panels and made them more robust. The X pattern that you see connecting the corners is fence wire to hold the rock wool in place. You will see all these later in the video. So let's start the build. The first task was to disassemble the pallets. This was the hardest part of the build. I had to saw most of the nails using this small metal saw. This was very hard and it took a lot of time. But since I don't have a lot of tools, this was the way I managed to disassemble the pallets. I had to saw all the points where there were nails. And this is how it looks, a single strip of the wood from the pallet. At this point, I had disassembled most of the wood from the first pallet, and I was already thinking to myself why I started doing this. The motivation started to decrease as I realized how hard it would be to build it, but I continue with the disassemble. Luckily, the second pallet was a little bit easier to take apart, and the strips in the middle were much easier to remove, and I could use just an hammer to take them out of the pallet. I was able to take 2 pallets apart, and to motivate me a little bit more, I decided to make the first panel. I also decided to make the first panel because I wanted to have an idea of the dimensions of the panel and if my original plan was going to work. I aligned the 4 strips of wood on the floor. I drilled a hole in the joints and screwed the first corner of the panel. For each corner, I used 2 screws. I also drilled a hole so that the wood would not crack with the screws. I did the same thing for the opposite corner, and I also did the same thing for the bottom part, and here is the first panel put together. When the panel was standing, I noticed that it was very shaky and it was not stable. I thought about adding another piece of wood to the inside of the corners to make it more robust. This turned out to be a good idea, and after installing all the corner pieces, the panel became more strong. Now that I have the first panel structure done, I started to disassemble the third pallet. For this one, I could not just use the metal saw. I had to use the wood saw to make a little bit of space in between the joints so that I could use the metal saw to saw the nails. Before disassembling the entire pallet, I used it as a base to cut the wood for the panels. Again, since I don't have a garage or a shop for this type of work, I had to improvise and make the best of what I have. After cutting all the wood that I had already for the pallets, I disassembled the rest of the pallet. I was very happy to have this done because I was not going to have to take anything else apart. The next step was to put together all the panels. I used the drill machine to make the holes, and then I screwed all the parts together. Because of the different sizes of the pallets, not all panels have the same total length. The inside strip of the wood is 1 meter apart from the top, but the legs have different sizes. I could have gutted this, but since I will not make holes in the walls, I left it as it is. As you can also see from this panel, some parts of the wood I had to screw together because I did not have enough wood. This was not a problem because I left these parts on the inside. After putting the fabric, it was not going to be visible. To make all the panels stronger, I cut it and added small squares to the inside corners, as I did with the first panel. I did this for all the corners and all the panels. The squares also serve as a base to hold the fence wire. I did a small ring on the wire and nailed it to the corner square with a small brass nail. I extended the wire and did the same for the opposite corner. I then repeated the process for the other side. The wire does not have a lot of tension and it only holds the rockwood panel, which is very light, so this should not come off very easily anytime soon. I did the same thing for all the panels, and here is how it looks with the wires in place. I thought about adding a paper bag panel that would sit in between the rock wool and the wire, but I scratched that idea after testing it with this paper box. I later went to my local tool shop to find something to place here, and I will show it later in the video. I cut a piece of the fabric to the size of the panel and I used it as a template to cut the rest of the fabric. I basically laid the fabric on the floor, placed the template on the top and cut the fabric with some scissors. This was not perfect, but I could cut the excess fabric later on when adding the fabric to the panel. The last step was to lay the wood structure on the floor and install the rock wool and the fabric. I mentioned before that I went to my local tool shop to find something to place on the back of the rock wool. I bought this cheap 25 square meter plastic to cover furniture and floors when painting. This turned out to be really good for this. I laid the plastic on top of the panel and cut it. I left a lot of excess on the sides because I could cut it after. I then placed the rock wool on the frame, the fabric on top, and turned the panel over to nail the fabric. I wrapped the fabric and used brass nails to hold the fabric together. I went from side to side to make sure the fabric was tight and stretched as possible. I did the same for the top and bottom, and here is the final panel put together. It was a lot of work, but they look really great. Now I just have to make 8 more of these. Here is an image of my studio with all the panels installed. Again, this is not perfect, but for a cheap build like this, it turned out to be really good. Here is also a before and after comparison of the acoustics of the room. Mic check, test 1, test 1. And now I will step a little bit away from the mic. Mic check, test 1, test 1. Mic check, test 1, test 1. And now even further. Mic check, test 1, test 1. Mic check, test 1, test 1. Mic check, test 1, test 1. And the most practical way of listening to the reverb is with a clap. As you can see, these panels make a big difference. I hope you enjoyed this video, and here is a list of the cost of each panel, including the tools that I had to buy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.